Okay, so my story is actually one my grandmother told me about a house near where she grew up. I think she was about 12 when it happened, so it was probably around 1933, 34. So, she grew up in South Carolina, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. If you went even further out, past the main shops and through the back roads and all the way out, where there was nothing but woods and grass, was a family who built a house out there. She said they hunted deer and squirrel, and that's pretty much all they ate. They never came into town, no one ever saw them. So of course, all the kids in the neighborhood wanted to see these people. Rumors are running rampant about who they are and what they do and stuff, so every now and then, some teenagers would go up there and try to sneak a look, but no one is ever quite brave enough to actually get close. They always hear something and come out running, which is what my grandmother said she wished had happened that night. So, anyway, she was 12, and she had an older sister who was 16 at the time. Her name was Lucy. All my grandmother ever wanted to do was to hang out with the older kids, but they would drink and smoke, so they didn't really want her around. But then this one time, it was just Lucy and her boyfriend Ronald. They were sitting outside, talking about that house in the woods. I guess the subject came up every now and then because, small town. So Ronald said no one had ever really seen them up close, because they were too scared to go up there. But then he corrected himself. He said there was only one person who ever went up to the house and actually went inside. But he came back wrong. He said it was this guy Gary, who everyone in town knew was the crazy old man, so no one listened to him, but Ronald told him that Gary was the bravest of his group of friends when he was a teenager. It must have been just before the 20s. He actually went inside once. He never told anyone what he saw or what happened because his friends didn't want for him. They just took off while he was in there, and the next time they saw him, he was just, quiet. He just mumbled and every now and then just stared ahead, not really paying attention. Since it was around their graduation time, his group of friends all split up anyway, but Gary stayed. He didn't have parents. He lived above the grocery store where he worked, and he's just been crazy ever since. Everyone just assumed he always was crazy. So of course my grandma didn't believe this story. She knew Gary, and she was certain, like everyone else, that he had always been touched, as she calls it. She wasn't really scared of anything. She just wanted to hang out with the older kids, so she told them she would go to the house, and even go inside if they let her hang out with them all night. Her sister said no way, but her boyfriend Ronald convinced her. He said she would be too scared to get close anyway, and it would be funny. So they all piled into his pickup and drove out. It was around 7, so the sun had just set, and they were out in the boonies. So basically, there's no light at all. It was total darkness by the time they got to the path that led to the house. He pulled over in case the family had rifles or shotguns. Back then, there wasn't much in the way of gun laws, and even now, it's South Carolina. So, they hiked it. And I guess it was much longer than they realized. By the time they got close to the house, they had been walking for like 10 minutes, so they were really far into the woods. So they get to where they can see the house. The moon was the only source of light. They didn't want to bring flashlights in case the family saw them. So Lucy and Ronald stay back in the path, and they send my grandmother, the little 12-year-old, out to go up to the house alone. Oh, and it is also important to mention that by now there's marsh all around. The only dry area is the path she's on. So, she's making her way to the house, and she keeps hearing something, making splashes in the water, but she grew up around marshes, so she doesn't pay any mind to it. She knows it's probably a duck or something. Of course, she starts getting jittery about it when she realizes it's getting louder as she gets closer to the house, and it's getting closer to her too. She can't see anything that's not directly under moonlight, so she stops and tries to focus on the sound. But it stopped too. By now, she's only a few feet from the house, so she basically says, "Screw it," and runs up. She puts her eyes between two boards that are nailed across a window and looks inside. It's really dark, but she says it didn't matter because she could see by the moonlight that there was nothing in the house at all. No furniture or anything. She almost laughed, thinking all this time people have been so scared to come to an empty house. The family isn't even there anymore. Then she heard the splashing again. It was behind her now, across the path. She walked away from the house and went behind a tree to try and see what it was, but trying to make sure it couldn't see her. She peeked around the tree, and she saw that whatever it was, it had a head full of long, matted hair.
Boo!
Ronald and Lucy grabbed her from behind and scared the ever-loving crap out of her. She was so angry she didn't even tell them she had seen or almost seen something. She just ran back down the path towards the truck, hoping that whatever it was would come out and eat them or something. But I guess by this time she didn't really believe she saw anything anyway. She assumed it was seaweed caught on a tree, as these things always turned out to be, and plus she was happy they came down the path so she wasn't alone, which, as it turned out, she now was. She thought about stopping and waiting for them, but she wanted them to know how angry she was, so she just kept walking. She got to the truck. When she looked up, she saw Ronald and Lucy, leaning, waiting. They saw her eyes turn to big white saucers and asked if she was okay. She just ran to the truck and told them it was time to go. The whole time she stared down the path, waiting for whoever it was that had been pretending to be her sister and her sister's boyfriend to show up and attack them, but they took off before anything happened. The whole ride home she was quiet. She didn't know what to make of what happened, so she didn't make anything of it. She just closed her eyes and listened to the road all the way home. No one else talked either, so it was easy for her to drift off. She woke up just as they pulled into the driveway. Her sister kept saying,
"Delicious! Delicious!"
but she didn't know what they were talking about and didn't really care. She just wanted to go home and to take a shower, sleep, and forget everything. She hopped off the truck and they called after her.
Don't you want to hang out anymore?
Ronald was the one asking. Her sister just looked at her and smiled. She said no and went inside. She said it wasn't until she was taking a shower that she realized she had smelled something the whole time since she woke up in the truck. The smell of copper. She looked down, and sure enough, there it was. A long, thin stream coming from her legs and circling the drain. I know it sounds gross, but it wasn't her period or anything. She said she was too young. Though she thought it might be for a second until she realized it wasn't actually coming from her leg. She wasn't sure where it was coming from, actually, so she got out. As soon as she turned the shower off, her sister knocked on the door.
"I thought you was coming with us. We're gonna get burgers at the Shanty Shack. Come on."
Her sister had this friendly kind of tone in her voice. It seemed like maybe she was really sorry for making her go up to the house, but even then, that's not how Lucy usually reacted to being sorry. She would pretty much just act like nothing happened and just be cordial with you. She'd never actually be nice. And then my grandmother heard it again, her sister whispering it behind the door.
"Delicious! Delicious!"
And that's when she felt a sting on the back of her neck. It had been there the whole time, she just didn't realize it. It was very small, but so deep it still hadn't stopped bleeding. There was a tiny little window in the bathroom that faced the driveway. She looked out and saw Lucy marching with Ronald, both pissed beyond words and yelling.
"How could she leave us like that? All we did was scare her a little."
My shoes are all worn and she took your truck? How'd she even learn to drive? There was another knock on the bathroom door.
"I just want a little more,"
it said. Then as the couple came into the house, she heard a smash. The window in the hallway was broken. Her real sister showed up and my grandmother hugged her tighter than ever before. Whatever it was in the hall was gone now. Of course, she didn't sleep through the night for weeks after that. The worst part, well, all of it is the worst part, but the worst part for her, and I think for me, is that every now and then she would wake up. The window would be open, and the back of her neck would be bleeding again. I asked if she didn't think she scratched herself in her sleep, but it wasn't until she saw the blood when she woke up that she remembered having a dream about a caterpillar that would burrow into the back of her neck. The whole time, she would keep hearing a voice repeating,
Delicious. Delicious. Delicious.